It is another episode of Amjambo Time. Thank you for all who help us to broadcast this unique program. I want to welcome our listeners in Maine and around the world. Here are our headline stories. On today's Amjambo Time, we are having a special program about education. You have seen immigrants coming into the neighborhood. You have seen them boarding school buses to start education in Maine, from Africa, Latin America, or Asia. Have you ever wondered how it looks like to educate them, their special needs, how their journey to America influences their education? Today's program, Educating Immigrants in Maine, how do we make it happen? Amjambo Time attend the conference Beyond Borders, a conference on migration and integration convened by the Multilingual and Multicultural Center of Portland Public Schools, where educators and others interested in education had a whole day to discuss the education of new Mainers. Don't miss this show. We have a lot to share. The full show starts after this break.
This program is sponsored by Maine Humanities Council, a statewide nonprofit that uses books, poetry, and big ideas to bring people together to discuss issues of importance. Maine Humanities Council offers facilitated discussion projects, speaker events, grant funding, and more. Maine Humanities Council would love to work with you to bring programming to your organization and your community. Please visit mainehumanitiescouncil.org to learn more.
At Amjambo Time, we bring new Mainers together with all Mainers. This is a collaboration between Amjambo Africa and WMPG of Southern Maine University 90.9. Thank you for tuning in. Many parents yearn for a great education for their kids. America is believed to offer it, at least in the eyes of outsiders. New Mainers who come from other countries only know what this education really looks like when they enter U.S. public schools. Amjambo talked to alumni of Portland Public Schools, Beriz and Daikunda.
When I look back, I see how much progress that have been made. There's so much improvement because my time when I was in Portland Public Schools, there were not so many immigrants, and I remember like so many things were still like unknown to whether it was the teachers that didn't know that who are the asylum seekers, what is the difference between asylum seekers and refugees, and were a lot of those issues that were there that were causing, like, because if some people at some point they thought that asylum seekers were undocumented people, and it would cause them some sort of confusion, but also in the way that we would get access to resources, scholarships, information, and even programs that were offered at the school.
My name is Salwan Ahmed, and I am the Make It Happen coordinator at Lincoln Middle School. It's essentially just a multilingual enrichment program for students in middle school. So my parents, when they got here, they didn't really understand like why like there wasn't like a ranking system and all that stuff, and how do they know like their student is doing well in school.
My name's Doris Juarez. I am here representing as an alumni of the Portland Public Schools, graduated from Deering High School in 2013. I'm a proud daughter of immigrants. My family's from Guatemala. And currently I work for TRIO College Programs, which is a college access program that supports first-generation students, students with disabilities, and also limited income coming to Maine. I felt like I was one of 5 Latinos in my middle school. So that was a struggle to know that I couldn't speak Spanish with a lot of my friends. And the only time that I spoke Spanish was when I went home to my family or when I went to church. And that was the only time that Spanish was being spoken. And that you had to be the translator between two worlds. So I had to translate what was happening at home to, say, the American culture in Maine, and then try to get them to understand that I have an entire other identity and culture that wasn't being represented in the school space.
Panelists in a session called Giving Back shared both their sweetest and worst memories of school. The moderator of the panel was Javier Botana, former superintendent of Portland Public Schools for 7 years. He remembers some of the panelists when they were just children.
Well, as I said during the session, it was, emotional, for me, because I think they represent both all of the good things that Portland Public Schools is able to do for our students, and also remind you of all of the places where we fall short and have work that needs to continue. So it was, it was great to listen to all of the ways in which they feel that Portland and their experience being students in the Portland Public Schools created who they are today. But some of those experiences are also, experiences that they recognize were not the best of experiences. And so, I think for me, for those in the room who are affiliated with Portland Public Schools, there's always this measure of learning that needs to come from those conversations to, sort of bask in the good, but also to look at the opportunities to do better that are also tied into those narratives.
The panel and the audience praised the bravery of the alumni for making it in Maine despite their struggles. The number of new Mainers in schools continues to increase and expand into more counties. The question is, what are the struggles these students face? And how can schools be more welcoming of new Mainer students? To begin with, students speaking a language other than English is of course challenging.
Jane Armstrong, and I am currently the ESOL State Specialist at the Department of Education. I think the challenge is that there's the time, the language acquisition is a time-based process, and so it takes time. And oftentimes students might be coming in 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade, and they're trying to learn the content, the information, while also trying to learn a new language. And so it's together that's hard to do those things at the same time. And I think what we want to do is what can we do to support both of those. And so that's a challenge we hear from students is, I know a lot, I want to share what I know, but I need to learn this new language. And I think that can be frustrating for students. And I think that it can also make them not feel excited to be in school, or sad, or isolated. So, we as teachers need to do, and as administrators and leaders of this work, it's our responsibility, not the child, to make the environment so that they can learn to the best of their ability and show what they know.
Another challenge for these students is their legal status in the country. Helping us to understand this, we have Sue Roche from ILAP.
Well, there's a lot of challenges, and I think the presentations we heard, the keynote speaker and then the students on the panel, we heard a lot of really great explanations for the impacts of how our really complex immigration system impacts families. We heard about the waiting, the years and years of waiting, the processes that aren't very fair, that other people that make you go through lots of complicated processes that don't really match with the reasons that people need protection, causing them to go through lots of challenging processes and waiting years and years, and the impact that can have. Trying to collect documents, improve their cases, the trauma that people have had in their own countries and then on their journey here, and then going through the immigration process is often re-traumatizing, not only because you have to sort of relive when you're going through the asylum process or special immigrant juvenile process, you have to relive the trauma that you experienced as you're telling your story, but also just the trauma of not knowing if you're going to get deported at the end of your case, whether you'll be able to remain here permanently, and that long waiting period and the uncertainty about the system is not really set up to be easy to navigate.
And how does it paralyze education system?
It impacts the emotional well-being of the students and their families. When families are going through the immigration process, that can prevent them, and when they don't have legal status that allows them to work and allows them to get all the other, driver's license and things they need, that really impacts the student's ability to, function the same way in school. They're often, as we heard earlier, needing to translate for parents and navigate a lot of those systems with them.
We are talking about challenges that new Mainers students face at school. How about communicating with parents?
My name is Maureen Clancy. I'm the Language Access Coordinator. I work at the Multilingual Multicultural Center at Portland Schools. If you don't know what your kids are doing in school, if you can't read the website or the information the teacher is sending, how are you able to support your child's success in school? If you don't know that they're struggling in a certain area, or that they're doing math homework tonight, or they're supposed to be reading 30 minutes tonight in a book, and you don't have that book at home and you don't know who to ask, how can you help your child be successful at school? So communication is the key to all of that. And our job is to make sure families who don't speak English have the same access to that information.
A lack of representation among school faculty and leadership negatively impacts the learning experience. Dr. Ahmed has been an influential figure in the Portland public schools. He talks to us about this issue.
For our students and the children to get prepared and to make sure that the school climate and instruction, curriculum, and everything is relevant. And for that to happen, it is very important that the students see themselves in the system, whether it is in the instructional materials, whether it is how the instruction or the curriculum is delivered, and whether it is who is delivering it. So, having a community, as we want to build a community in our student body, we need also this community to be reflected in our staffing, in our adult and professional domains. So for that, and research shows like when the students have people who look like them, they do better. And do better meaning like student outcomes is correlated to the who the teachers are. So, and that's not saying like a black student needs a black teacher only, but it should be a reflection of the student body to be in the other end, which is not in. That's not the case in the U.S. Majority of the staff are, or the teachers are white. So there need to be work to be done in that area to just bring and diversify the staffing in schools.
Challenges are numerous, but attendees of Beyond Borders had an opportunity to look at solutions, best practices, and more. Dr. Abi Yamamoto, the Executive Director of Portland Adult Education, stresses the importance of cultural competence when educating students from another culture.
From the perspective of the child, you need to feel like you understand yourself and you're accepted as a whole person in order to facilitate any kind of learning, because if you feel like any part of you is denied, you're not going to feel like learning anything. And I think it's just like exhausting to be always fighting and talking about, well, this is a part of me, this is who I am, and having to fight that all the time. And I say this from my personal experience. I was like constantly fighting, my So my mother is an immigrant to Japan. So I grew up in Japan as a child of an immigrant parent, and it's just like exhausting to be constantly fighting to be understood, to be accepted, to be validated, and it just adds another layer to the learning experience. And so, yes, in terms of pushing through discomfort, I'm very used to that because that was my entire life. And people talk about that as resiliency, but what people also forget is that the people who couldn't push through that get crushed. And so you really have this bifurcation between people who can get through and who can't, because you're being tested as children already. And I think that's very cruel. And I think really the better way is for everyone to be able to feel like, you know, I am heard and I am a whole person and all of who I am is valuable and validated, so that we all have a chance to thrive and to succeed in life.
So can you draw a few piece of advice for the teachers who are facing the immigrant kids every day in terms of cultural direction?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the teachers also have to transform, right, as a workforce. Like, the teachers should also include immigrants and also children of immigrants, so they really understand that. And I do find that people who work in the district or anywhere really who are immigrant children tend to understand me very well, and they're very helpful because I can tell they're used to their parents who like just don't get it, and they're very quick to detect when I'm not getting things, and they just come up and explain things to me in a way that I understand. And so that kind of facility is so important, but also we need to make sure that the teachers also, you know, people like that are represented in the teacher population as well. And I think that will change the immigrant children's experience too. And I mean, but also there's, I think, a lot of effort on the side of the non-immigrant children, teachers, to understand and to reach out and to imagine what it might be like to have that kind of experience that the immigrant children might have. And so I think that effort needs to keep continuing, because when you're trying to understand something that is just completely different from what you've experienced, it takes that much more effort. And it might be exhausting, but it's even, you know, when you think about, well, what's the alternative? The alternative is a child who's exhausted and might not have a chance to flourish or to thrive because they feel denied and invalidated for where they come from and for their heritage. So you kind of have to think about that balance of what do you want to achieve.
One session focused on listening to the learners' voices.
My name is Clara Jean Howard, and I'm an assistant professor of education at the University of Maine at Farmington, and I teach in the elementary, secondary, and graduate programs to help prepare teachers to work with linguistically and culturally diverse students, new Mainers. Well, street data is kind of a reversal of the data that we are mostly required as educators to attend to. We're asked to look at big data, standards, assessment test data, numbers that are supposed to represent the diversity of all the students that we serve, but it was very reductive, and we have been collecting that data for, well, many more decades than I care to say, but particularly in the last 2 decades, we noticed that all of that attention to that data hasn't moved the achievements, the opportunities for our multilingual students in particular, and many others. So this is in reaction to that, and to ask us to instead turn more of our attention to the voices of the learners we serve, to deeply listen to what they have to say about the educational experiences and the practices and the instruction that they want and need and most are most impacted by. So it's asking us to invite the voices of our students as ways for us educators to learn from their ways of knowing and their ways of being. Well, students, they are meant to be the beneficiaries of our educational structures and systems. But we're noticing too much that they're not necessarily benefiting to the degree that they should be, that the potential is being wasted in some ways, and I suspect it's from systemic inequities that are baked into our educational systems. So the ways we prepare teachers, the curriculums we choose, the ways of the way our school buildings are set up, perhaps how our grading and sorting of students is not necessarily in good service or effective service of our changing demographics, of how our students really need to be served. And I believe from some research I've conducted that students' voices can be a tool, a way of informing us to listen to what it is that our students and their families bring to our schools, what we can learn from their ways of thinking and their ways of understanding, and the cultures, their linguistic resources, and the ways that they might help us to shift things to benefit those who are mostly marginalized.
School ought to cultivate a spirit of collective well-being while teaching new manners students. How does that work? Dr. Bruce Sentoma and Marie Shefford researched this subject.
Children cannot learn if they don't feel accepted, and if they don't feel like they belong. So a lot of the work that we're trying to teach people, that the children want us to teach, that they've begged us to teach for years, is how to create intercultural communities of acceptance. And that really starts with each one of us, and we call it compassionate leadership. But how do we show up and kind of deal with ourselves while engaging with others, right? So that's the main piece of the work, right?
Yeah, and it's really the ability to find our connections through our differences.
So I think that most of these, they may be seen in a classic teaching room as an extra job that you are going to give to instructors, and they may reject it or accept it. So how do we push so that this can be inculcated or included in the teaching methodology?
Yeah. So we need to know that the systems are broken and they're not working. And so in our time of humanity, we look everywhere and there's problems, right? And this is kind of the result of collective trauma in the world.
And I think that embedded in the systems are a lot of ethnocentric patterns and traditions that are accepted as the norm, and that makes it very inflexible for people who are coming from other worldviews and other cultures to be seen and heard.
And so we have work to do. So being a teacher is not what being a teacher was for any of us. We have to show up.
So I'm seeing a child who enters a classroom, and is the only type of color in the classroom. There is only books about America, and and English is the only language spoken. So how do you push this in the book, in the research?
But we need to come together, and if we look at the population, that we're all different, and there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. And so how do we kind of lean into the fear, lean into the anxiety, and get together to make a difference?
Another important factor for the success of new MENA students, supporting students beyond the classroom. Edom Tesfa is researching this topic in the Portland public schools. Tell us about the findings of your research.
I think one of the most important things is, starting with the classroom, starting with the school, creating an environment where students feel like I can be who I am. My culture is valued here. People respect me. If I'm experiencing discrimination, there's an adult that I can talk to help me get that issue fixed. I feel like I won't be arrested for doing something bad at school. All of those are really important features to getting students to stay engaged in school. And when you start from that base, students are more comfortable in pursuing opportunities outside of school, such as applying for college and scholarships, finding a job or internship or apprenticeship, speaking up and engaging in student voice activities, asking the principal or the school committee or school board for more resources. All of that starts in school, but it cannot end there.
Portland Public Schools leadership has got a homework to do. Aaron Townsend is the deputy superintendent of the district.
Two things I would say. One, there are pockets where we're trying to concentrate some of those supports. So for some of our students, particularly those with the limited or interrupted formal English, kind of consolidating those supports in some intentional programming so that it's a coherent experience for them. I think more broadly across the system, what we know and part of our commitment to building the capacity of all educators to be kind of language educators is what's good for our immigrant students is actually good for all of our students, right? That development is needed not just for those specialized populations, but across the board. So trying to make school communities holistically be able to kind of prioritize that diverse range of kind of needs and supports and engagement to be able to provide that for all kids.
Checking about staffing, having more staff that look like those kids or from the communities. So how far are you building on that momentum?
Yeah, we continue to make progress. We'll have our data coming up here in the month of October in terms of our numbers of where we stand, but I know just anecdotally at a leadership level, we continue to increase the diversity of leadership, both in terms of principals, assistant principals, at the system level, and our Elevating Educators program, which is creating pathways, particularly from ed tech roles into teaching, continues to grow. So we'll have the specific numbers, but I think we've continued to see growth across kind of different employee groups in terms of the diversification of our staff.
What is unquestionable is that new Mainers can make it through schools and become the powerhouse that the state can count on for years ahead. Javier Botana.
It's harder today. It's, the environment is not as welcoming as it was, but you see all of the people that are here today. These are folks that are committed to creating those opportunities and to building the structures and supports that will allow today's immigrants to achieve their dreams and realize their potential.
Parents, educators, leaders, and the entire state have a role to play in the education of new Mainers. We won't benefit free from their potential if we have not done our part. Thanks to the Multilingual and Multicultural Center of Portland Public Schools for convening this important conference. We have come to the end of today's Amjambo Time. Thank you for tuning in. Please keep an eye on WMPG and the Amjambo Africa website for a podcast of this show and more news we are covering in Maine. And remember, Amjambo Time alternates with our newest show, Wiriwe Maine, on air in Kinyarwanda and Kirundi on alternate Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and available by podcast at amjamboafrica.com. And stay tuned for news about Salimen, our newest podcast to be broadcast entirely in French. Amjambo Time is brought to you by Jaha Kuzimana. Have a great day.
This program is sponsored by Maine Humanities Council, a statewide nonprofit that uses books, poetry, and big ideas to bring people together to discuss issues of importance. Maine Humanities Council offers facilitated discussion projects, speaker events, grant funding, and more. Maine Humanities Council would love to work with you to bring programming to your organization and your community. Please visit mainehumanitiescouncil.org to learn more.